Do a thought experiment with me, would you? Imagine you plan a family vacation. You're going to go across the Atlantic and go on a trip to Paris. And then you decide your trip will also include a jaunt down to the Riviera and back up around to Normandy. You would not be surprised at all that there were people speaking French, right, on the entire trip, right? At no point would you go in the heart of Paris, oh my goodness, why are there so many people speaking French here? You wouldn't go down to the Riviera and then be shocked to find more people speaking in French. You would assume, if you're going to take a trip to Paris, if you're going to go to Normandy, if you're going to go to the Riviera, these are places where they speak French because you're in France, right? Now, you can't guarantee what kind of experience you'll have there. You can't say, oh, I bet I'll meet somebody named Jacques. I bet I'll meet somebody named Jean-Luc. I bet I'll have a conversation with somebody at a cafe somewhere. You can't necessarily predict exactly what conversation will happen where, but you can be pretty sure you're going to end up needing to speak French, and you will run across people who are French in France, right? So whatever assumptions you might have had about French people will either be confirmed, or you'll find out, oh, it's not what I thought. I maybe expected that all French people were this way or this way or this way, and I discovered, no, there's a wide variety of what French citizens are like. But you wouldn't be surprised that you run across people speaking French if you deliberately planned a trip to Paris or any of those other sites. Now, if we can give one another that much credit, right, that we would know what to expect on a trip to Paris or to Normandy, can we give Jesus the same amount of credit? Here's what I mean. We're going to hear a story this coming Sunday where Jesus encounters a woman who is not only of Gentile, the narrator Mark says she's of Syro-Phoenician origin. She's ethnically not Jewish. She comes from the wrong religious background, the wrong national background, might even speak other languages, might only speak Greek or some other language other than Jesus' native language of Aramaic. And the conversation that Jesus has with her at first seems almost downright rude. This woman comes to Jesus asking for help, and Jesus sort of officially responds, at least at first, saying, well, look, it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. After all, he's sort of saying, I've come to the lost children of the house of Israel, right? I've come to be Israel's Messiah, and here you are, an outsider, a Gentile. And the woman immediately sort of parries back, yeah, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the children's table. Now, one of the things that's so difficult about this story is we only have the written record of it. We don't hear the tone in Jesus' voice. We don't hear whether in this conversation back and forth there's sort of a playfulness. Is there a glimmer in Jesus' eyes? Is there a wink? Is there a smirk? Is there a smile as he says these things? But I think the context is really, really important because as Mark tells the story, Jesus doesn't happen to be accosted by this random Gentile woman who sought him out. Jesus has deliberately gone on a trip to Gentile territory. Jesus has gone, Mark says, to the Gentile city of Tyre, which is outside of Judea and Galilee. It's notorious. It's for centuries been Gentile territory. And after this story, Jesus takes a tour of other Gentile regions, going up and around to other Gentile regions around the Sea of Galilee and another set of Gentile Greek cities, the Decapolis, Mark says, and continues to heal and encounter people there. All of that says to me, Jesus' presence there in this scene is deliberate. Jesus knows exactly the kind of scenario he's going to run across by heading into Gentile territory. He might not have predicted, oh, I bet I'll meet a woman whose daughter is in need of my help. Oh, I bet I'll meet this particular person. He might not know her name, but you don't go into Gentile territory without expecting you will run into Gentile people. And at that point, either all the prejudices that had been impressed upon Jesus from childhood, right? All the things that you hear other people saying about those Gentiles, right? They can't believe in God. They're godless. They're pagan. They're self-absorbed. They're materialistic. They're, a long list of things. Jesus goes, I'm convinced, intentionally knowing he's going to run across Gentile people. And this is the chance Either for him to say, oh, well, I guess all those things, all those people told me about Gentiles was right. It turns out they are terrible, unfaithful pagan people. Or Jesus goes with the possibility that they just might show they're people with faces who are capable of deep faith and trust as well, regardless of all the prejudices that had been parroted into Jesus' ears by the culture that he'd grown up in. In other words, I'm convinced the more and more I read this story, Jesus heads into Gentile territory. Jesus has this conversation with this Syrophoenician woman exactly because he's going to find out. He's going to discover and maybe to take seriously for his disciples to see that those people they've regarded as outsiders, as not good enough, as not our kind of people, are exactly the people who belong and who can call out for God's help the same way as fellow Judeans or Galileans like Jesus and his disciples. There's a line of the writer Dallas Willard that sticks in my head. He says, it can mean little to call Jesus Lord if you have to hesitate before saying Jesus is smart. Let me say that again. It means little to say Jesus is Lord if you have to hesitate before saying Jesus is smart. And what I think that means in a story like this is to say, here Jesus is headed into Gentile territory. Do we seriously think Jesus is not intelligent enough? Do we seriously think Jesus did not have the forethought to realize exactly what kind of people, exactly what kind of encounters he might have in Gentile territory? Or is that the point? Jesus deliberately puts himself in a place where he's going to have to discover, where he's going to have to see, where other people are going to have to see him going on record saying, God's love is for these people too. Yep, they had been outsiders before. Yep, everybody all my life had told me these people aren't good enough, aren't acceptable. They're outside the bounds of the ones God can love. Here, Jesus deliberately goes into this place, setting up that there will be some kind of encounter that forces Jesus to go on record saying, God's love is for you too. And the fact that after the scene with the Syrophoenician woman, he goes on to other Gentile territories and meets other people and heals other people who are troubled suggests that Jesus didn't think this was a mistake. Jesus didn't go, oh my goodness, I didn't know I'd run into that kind of people here. Let me go back home where I'll only ever meet people who are already like me and only ever encounter people who already share my faith. Jesus deliberately continues his tour among outsiders. This is the critical linchpin of this story. Jesus knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly how provocative he's being by taking a vacationing tour, not among people like him, but by going out to Gentile territory. He knows exactly that he is setting up some kind of encounter like that. And when an actual person with actual needs shows up and an actual face, and not just sort of a generic them and those people, the moment this story that Gentiles have a face, Jesus sees and can point out to his disciples, look, these are people with deep, deep faith as well. They are people that God's reign, God's goodness, God's help, God's healing, and God's love are available to as well. Something happens to us when we actually encounter people who are different and outside of our experience. We discover they're made in the image of God too. We discover that for all the ways we may be different, they're worthy of our love, our time, our care, and our attention. That's what Jesus demonstrates in this story. So I can't help but think that whole back and forth about, well, it's not right to take the children's food and feed it to the dogs. I can't help but think Jesus says that with sort of a wink in his eye, or with sort of, you know what everybody else is going to say. Everybody else would say that you're just one of those Gentile dogs. What will we say back to them when they ask? And her parry back, her response suggests she gets exactly what Jesus is doing there. Well, I guess we'll have to tell him that even the children's dogs get the crumbs that fall from their table. Jesus knows exactly what he's doing, heading into Gentile territory, and we're convinced the same Jesus sends us out into the world too. So this Sunday, as we wrestle with this story and hear it maybe with fresh ears, be prepared. Jesus will send us out into the world, not just the people who are already like us, not just the people who are already in our church or already attend our congregation or people who share our faith, but exactly across boundaries and borders to meet people who are outside of what's familiar to us, to push us beyond our comfort zone. That's the conversation we're having this Sunday, and we invite you to be a part of it too. See you then.